These documents prove you manipulated the market. You thought you could get away with this in my city. This entire deal is a fraud. Look at these charts, look at the shell accounts, it's all right here.
And we have the evidence to prove it. You're finished.
Invisible people shouldn't interrupt important conversations. The words landed colder than the Manhattan rain hammering the glass walls of Vail International Tower. Evelyn Brooks lowered her eyes and tightened her grip around the silver cleaning cloth in her hand as billionaire Harrison Vail walked past her without slowing down. His Italian leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor while two executives followed close behind, laughing at something he had just said. None of them looked at her. Not really. To them, she was part of the building. Another shadow in a gray housekeeping uniform polishing fingerprints off million-dollar windows on the 52nd floor. Harrison stopped near the boardroom doors, adjusting the cufflinks beneath his navy suit jacket. "Make sure this hallway is spotless before the investors arrive," he said without turning around. Then his voice hardened slightly. "And keep the staff invisible tonight." The executives smirked quietly. Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, sir." The men disappeared into the boardroom as the heavy glass doors sealed shut behind them with a soft hiss. Silence returned for exactly 3 seconds. Then came the muffled sound of voices, laptops opening, chairs sliding across polished hardwood, and the distant hum of a projector warming up. Evelyn exhaled slowly and knelt beside the marble wall, wiping away a streak left behind by somebody's expensive coffee. The smell of roasted espresso still lingered in the air along with the sharp scent of cologne and fresh printer ink. Outside the windows, New York glowed beneath the storm clouds like a sea of restless gold. She tried to focus on her work. She really did. But then she heard the French voice through the partially closed side door. "Transfer the liability tonight before midnight." Evelyn froze. Her hand stopped moving instantly. For a moment, even the sound of rain seemed to disappear. Slowly, she lifted her eyes toward the boardroom. The voice continued speaking rapidly in French, smooth and confident, discussing offshore subsidiaries, debt transfers, and insurance restructuring. Her pulse quickened. Most people in the building would not have understood a single word, but Evelyn understood every sentence perfectly. For years ago, before hospital bills swallowed her future whole, she had been at Columbia University studying international finance with a minor in foreign languages. French had been her best subject. Her professor once told her she could negotiate billion-dollar deals before the age of 30. Then her younger brother Marcus got sick. Dialysis treatments replaced textbooks. Night shifts replaced internships. Dreams became overdue notices taped to apartment doors in the Bronx. Evelyn pushed the memory down and stood slowly, her heartbeat now echoing inside her chest. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Dangerous. Through the narrow glass strip beside the boardroom door, she could see Harrison Vail standing at the head of the massive conference table beneath the chandelier lights. His reflection stretched across the polished black surface like a king preparing for war. Lawyers flipped through contracts while financial analysts typed numbers into glowing spreadsheets. Nobody looked worried. Nobody realized what was happening. Then the French voice said one final sentence that turned Evelyn's blood cold. "Once the transfer is complete, Vail International absorbs every foreign debt obligation." Her eyes widened instantly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Inside the boardroom, Harrison reached for the silver pin beside the contract. And for the first time all night, Evelyn Brooks stopped feeling invisible. Evelyn stared through the narrow strip of glass as Harrison Vail uncapped the silver pin beside the contract. The room beyond looked impossibly polished under the chandelier light. Crystal water glasses reflected against black marble. Screens glowed blue with market projections. Men in tailored suits leaned back comfortably, convinced they were about to close the biggest acquisition in Vail International history. Nobody noticed the woman standing outside with a cleaning cloth in her trembling hand. Evelyn swallowed hard. Her mind raced through every French sentence she had just heard. Debt reassignment. Offshore exposure. Liability transfer. It was not a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Someone inside that room was moving billions in foreign debt directly onto Harrison's company before midnight. If he signed that contract, Vale International would absorb losses that could destroy entire divisions within months. She stepped toward the boardroom door instinctively, then stopped herself. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished glass. Gray housekeeping uniform, rubber-soled shoes, employee badge hanging from her neck. Invisible. Her chest tightened. For years ago, she had stood inside classrooms discussing global market failures with professors who managed hedge funds worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She remembered late nights in Butler Library, surrounded by finance journals and half-empty coffee cups, while snow fell across Manhattan outside the windows. Back then, people listened when Evelyn Brooks spoke. Back then, she believed intelligence alone could change a person's future. Then came the hospital room. Marcus lying pale beneath fluorescent lights at Mount Sinai Hospital while machines hummed beside him. Kidney failure at 16 years old. Insurance refusing to cover experimental treatments. Their mother working double shifts until her body finally gave out from exhaustion. Evelyn still remembered withdrawing from Columbia 2 weeks before graduation. Her academic advisor had tried to stop her. "You are throwing away a career most people would kill for," he told her quietly. But careers did not keep little brothers alive. Money did. And money disappeared fast in New York City. The memory faded as another burst of laughter echoed from inside the boardroom. One executive loosened his tie while another raised a glass of sparkling water. Harrison stood near the projector screen, calm and confident, completely unaware that disaster was sitting inches from his signature. Evelyn felt something twist painfully in her stomach. She should walk away. That was the safe choice. Finish her shift. Catch the downtown train to the Bronx. Help Marcus with his medication before bed. Survive another week. People like Harrison Vale did not listen to women like her, especially not black women in housekeeping uniforms. She knew that lesson too well. Last winter, she tried warning a building manager about fraudulent maintenance invoices. He accused her of overstepping and cut her hours for 2 months. "Stick to cleaning," he had said coldly. Since then, Evelyn had learned silence paid better than honesty. But tonight, silence felt heavier. Through the glass, she noticed one of the foreign investors slide another document toward Harrison. The French consultant beside him nodded calmly, fingers folded together like everything was already decided. Harrison barely glanced down before lifting the pen again. Rain hammered harder against the windows now, streaking silver across the skyline. Lightning flashed somewhere over the Hudson River, illuminating the room in cold white light for half a second. Evelyn's heartbeat pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Then she saw the final page. Schedule C, International Liability Assumption Clause. Hidden beneath 3 pages of legal restructuring language. Exactly where she would have buried it too. Her breath caught sharply. "No," she whispered under her breath. Inside the room, Harrison lowered the tip of the pen toward the contract. And this time, Evelyn did not hesitate. Evelyn pushed the boardroom door open just as Harrison Vale prepared to sign the final page. The sudden sound cut through the quiet hum of the meeting like a crack of thunder. Every head turned instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The projector continued glowing against the wall, casting pale blue light across confused faces and polished glass water pitchers. Harrison looked up sharply, irritation flashing across his expression the moment he recognized her gray housekeeping uniform. "What is this?" he asked coldly. Evelyn could feel 20 pairs of eyes locking onto her at once. Lawyers, executives, foreign investors, men who probably earn more in a week than she made in a year. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to keep walking until she reached the far end of the conference table. Rain streaked down the massive windows behind her, turning the city lights blurry and distant. "Sir," she said carefully, trying to steady her breathing, "you cannot sign that contract." Silence. One executive blinked in disbelief. Another let out a short, nervous laugh, assuming this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Harrison leaned back slowly in his chair, the silver pen still balanced between his fingers. "Excuse me." His voice dropped lower now. "Dangerous." Evelyn swallowed hard. The liability structure was changed. The debt transfer happens tonight through the Luxembourg subsidiary. Once the merger closes, Vale International absorbs all foreign obligations tied to their offshore accounts. The room went completely still. For half a second, nobody moved at all. Then a gray-haired attorney near the center of the table frowned deeply. "That is impossible," he muttered. One of the younger analysts immediately began flipping through printed documents. Harrison stared at Evelyn like he was trying to understand how a woman cleaning windows even knew those words existed. Across the table, the French consultant slowly straightened in his chair. His calm smile faded just slightly. "Who exactly are you?" he asked in a controlled tone. Evelyn met his gaze directly for the first time. "Someone who understands French." Several executives turned toward the consultant immediately. A ripple of unease spread across the room. Harrison's jaw tightened visibly. "You were listening outside the door?" he asked. "I overheard enough to know your company is about to inherit billions in hidden debt." One man near the windows scoffed openly. "This is ridiculous. Since when does housekeeping audit corporate acquisitions?" A few nervous chuckles followed, though weaker now. Evelyn ignored them. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs so hard it almost hurt. "Page 94, she said quietly. "Schedule C, International Liability Assumption Clause." The language was buried under restructuring terminology. Harrison's expression hardened. "You expect me to believe a maid caught something my entire legal department missed?" The words landed hard, but Evelyn kept her posture steady. "No, sir," she replied softly. "I expect you to verify it before you sign." The room fell silent again. Somewhere behind them, the storm rumbled over Manhattan. Harrison stared at her another long moment before finally turning toward his legal team. "Check it." Nobody moved at first. Then papers began shuffling rapidly across the table. Analysts opened laptops. The attorney near the center adjusted his glasses and flipped directly to the section Evelyn mentioned. The French consultant remained perfectly still now, though a faint tension had appeared around his eyes. Evelyn noticed it immediately. Harrison noticed it too. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Nobody laughed anymore. The older attorney suddenly stopped turning pages. His face drained of color beneath the chandelier light. "Dear God," he whispered. The words hung in the air heavier than the storm outside. "Dear God." The attorney whispered again, this time loud enough for everyone to hear. Harrison Vale turned sharply toward him. "Explain." The older man adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers and pushed the contract across the polished table. The liability clause was rewritten through the Luxembourg Shell Corporation exactly as she described. If this merger closes tonight, Vale International becomes legally responsible for every offshore debt tied to Delacroix Global. A cold silence swallowed the room. The projector hummed softly against the wall while rain battered the windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Harrison slowly lowered the silver pen onto the table. Nobody touched their water glasses anymore. Nobody checked their phones. Every eye in the room shifted toward Evelyn Brooks. She stood near the doorway in her housekeeping uniform, shoulders tense, hands still slightly damp from cleaning solution. Harrison looked at the page again, reading each line more carefully now. The confidence that had filled the room 20 minutes earlier had completely vanished. "How much exposure are we talking about?" he asked quietly. One analyst typed rapidly into a laptop before answering. "Potentially $3.8 billion over 5 years. Several executives visibly stiffened. One woman covered her mouth softly in disbelief. Another investor muttered something under his breath in French. Harrison's expression darkened with every second. Across the table, the French consultant forced a tight smile. "This appears to be a misunderstanding in translation," he said calmly. "The restructuring language is extremely technical." Evelyn spoke before anyone else could answer. "No," she said firmly. The wording was intentional. The consultant turned toward her slowly. "And you are suddenly an expert in international acquisitions?" His tone remained polite, but the contempt beneath it was impossible to miss. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest, though she kept her voice steady. "I studied international finance at Columbia before I left school." The room shifted instantly. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "You studied finance?" he repeated. Evelyn nodded once. "I completed almost 4 years." One executive blinked in confusion. "Then why are you working housekeeping?" The question landed harder than intended. Evelyn hesitated briefly before answering. "My younger brother needed medical treatment. Tuition became impossible." Nobody spoke after that. The storm outside rolled low across the skyline, shaking faintly against the glass walls. Harrison looked at her differently now. Not warmly, not kindly, but differently, like he was finally seeing details that had been invisible to him all evening. The consultant leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked carefully. Even if there was concern, he said smoothly. Interrupting a confidential negotiation based on partial understanding was reckless. Harrison did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the contract while his legal team continued reviewing page after page. Then another attorney looked up sharply. There are additional hidden obligations buried in the insurance schedules. More silence. One analyst suddenly closed his laptop with visible frustration. This entire deal was structured to bury losses inside Vale International. The words hit the room like ice water. Harrison slowly removed his glasses and rubbed a hand across his jaw. For the first time since Evelyn entered the room, he looked tired instead of powerful. Older somehow. The French consultant stood carefully. Perhaps this meeting should continue tomorrow once emotions settle. But Harrison's voice stopped him before he could. Move. Sit down. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Harrison looked toward Evelyn again, studying her face with growing disbelief. You caught all this just by overhearing a conversation outside the door? Evelyn nodded quietly. The clause structure was familiar. Harrison's eyes hardened slightly. Familiar how? Evelyn hesitated. The answer sat heavy in her chest. Because my father lost everything to a deal structured the same way. The room went completely still again. The confession settled over the boardroom like smoke after a fire. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for their phones or laptops anymore. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now, sliding slowly down the 52-story windows in silver streaks. Harrison Vale stared at Evelyn Brooks across the conference table, his expression unreadable. Your father? He asked at last. Evelyn nodded once, though her throat felt tight. He worked for a shipping company in Baltimore when I was 12. They signed a restructuring agreement that transferred debt through offshore accounts nobody understood until it was too late. Her voice remained calm, but the memory still carried weight behind every word. 3 months later, the company collapsed. Executives walked away protected. Employees lost everything. One of the attorneys lowered his eyes quietly. Another executive loosened his tie again, visibly uncomfortable now. Harrison remained silent. Evelyn continued carefully. My father spent years blaming himself because he signed documents he trusted other people to explain honestly. The room stayed still. Somewhere near the windows, lightning flickered softly beyond the clouds above Manhattan. Harrison looked down at the contract spread open in front of him. His fingers rested beside the exact clause that almost buried his company under billions in debt. The French consultant finally spoke again, though the confidence in his voice had weakened. This comparison is emotional, not professional. Corporate acquisitions involve complex structures that can easily be misunderstood. No, Evelyn answered quietly before anyone else could speak. Predatory language always sounds complicated on purpose. Several heads turned toward her again. Harrison's legal advisor slowly closed the contract binder and exhaled through his nose. She is correct, he admitted heavily. The debt exposure was intentionally concealed. The consultant's jaw tightened. You are accusing my firm of fraud? Harrison finally looked up. His eyes had changed completely now. The arrogance that once filled them was gone, replaced by something colder. Sharper. I am accusing your firm, he said slowly, of attempting to destroy my company while smiling across my table. Nobody breathed for a second. The consultant opened his mouth to respond, but Harrison raised one hand slightly. Meeting adjourned. Chairs shifted instantly. Executives exchanged nervous glances while assistants hurried to gather documents. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. The energy inside the room had completely transformed. What began as a celebration now felt like the aftermath of an earthquake. The French consultant stood stiffly, collecting his papers with controlled movements. This misunderstanding will cost both our companies greatly, he said. Harrison's expression never changed. No, he replied calmly. What would have cost me greatly was signing that contract. The consultant gave Evelyn one final unreadable look before walking toward the exit with the rest of his team. The boardroom doors opened and closed softly behind them. Silence returned almost immediately afterward. Harrison remained seated at the head of the table, staring at the skyline beyond the windows. Most of the executives slowly filtered out behind him until only 3 people remained inside the massive room. Harrison, his lead attorney, And Evelyn. The attorney gathered the remaining files carefully. I will begin a full review of every communication tied to Delacroix Global, he said quietly. Harrison nodded once without looking away from the windows. Tonight? Yes, sir. A moment later the attorney left too. Then there were only 2 people remaining in the room. Evelyn suddenly became aware of how hard her heart was still beating. The chandelier lights reflected softly against the black marble table between them. Harrison finally removed his glasses again and rubbed tired fingers against his eyes. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Not weaker, just human. Slowly, he stood and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. Do you know what bothers me most? He asked quietly. Evelyn said nothing. Harrison looked down at the city lights below. It is not the fact they tried to deceive me. He paused briefly. It is the fact the only person in this building who truly saw it was the woman I told to stay invisible. The boardroom remained silent long after Harrison spoke. Rain drifted slowly down the glass walls, soft now instead of violent, turning the Manhattan skyline into blurred ribbons of gold and silver light. Evelyn stood near the end of the conference table, unsure whether she was supposed to leave or stay. Her cleaning cart still waited outside the door exactly where she left it, as if the world beyond this room had not changed at all. Harrison kept staring out across the city. His reflection floated faintly in the dark glass beside thousands of office lights stretching into the distance. My father used to say something similar, he said quietly after a long pause. Evelyn looked at him but did not interrupt. Harrison folded his arms loosely. He said powerful people stop noticing others because noticing creates responsibility. His voice carried none of the sharpness it had earlier, only exhaustion. I thought he was weak for thinking that way. Evelyn glanced toward the abandoned contract lying open on the table. Maybe he just understood people better. Harrison let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. Maybe. The room fell quiet again. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the wet streets below. Evelyn slowly set the cleaning cloth down beside the conference table. Her hands finally stopped shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She had not realized how tense her body had become over the last hour. Harrison turned slightly toward her. You knew exactly where to look inside that contract. Evelyn nodded once. Predatory agreements usually hide the danger where nobody expects ordinary people to read. Harrison's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Ordinary people. Evelyn gave a small shrug. Most executives assume janitors, assistants, drivers, servers, people like us, stop listening once conversations become expensive. The words settled quietly between them. Harrison looked away first. The truth inside them was too obvious now to ignore. Evelyn walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city. The marble floor reflected faint light beneath her worn shoes while the storm clouds drifted lower over the Hudson River. When my father lost everything, she said softly. The hardest part was not the money. Harrison listened without speaking. It was watching people pretend they could not see him anymore after he became poor. Her eyes remained fixed on the streets below. Friends stopped calling. Coworkers crossed the street to avoid him. Like failure was contagious. Harrison's jaw tightened slightly. Evelyn continued quietly. He used to tell me invisibility hurts more than humiliation because at least humiliation means somebody still sees you. The room became completely still again. Harrison lowered his eyes toward the floor for several seconds before speaking. I said those words to you tonight without thinking twice. Evelyn turned toward him calmly. Most people do. Harrison met her gaze fully now. For the first time all evening there was no arrogance left in his face. No billionaire distance. Just regret settling slowly behind tired eyes. And yet you still saved my company. Evelyn looked down briefly at the skyline, glowing beneath the rain. Disasters do not care who gets ignored, Mr. Vale. Harrison said nothing after that. The city lights reflected softly across the windows beside them while the air conditioning hummed overhead. Somewhere downstairs, elevators chimed faintly through the enormous tower. Life continuing normally beneath a moment that had quietly changed 2 people forever. After a while, Evelyn reached for her cleaning cart near the doorway. I should finish my shift. Harrison watched her carefully as she picked up the cloth again. The same cloth she had been holding when he told her invisible people should stay quiet. Only now neither of them could pretend she was invisible anymore. Evelyn pushed her cleaning cart slowly through the executive hallway while the tower settled into after-midnight silence. Most of the office lights had gone dark now, leaving only scattered reflections across the marble floors and glass walls. The storm outside had weakened to a soft drizzle, and the city below glowed in blurred gold through the rain-streaked windows. She tried to focus on work again. Empty trash bins, coffee cups left behind by exhausted assistants, fingerprints on conference room glass. Familiar tasks, simple tasks, safe tasks. But her mind would not settle. Every few minutes, she replayed the look on Harrison Vale's face when he realized how close he had come to destroying his own company. The fear in his eyes had not looked like fear for money. It looked personal. Evelyn stopped outside a smaller meeting room and sprayed cleaner across the polished table inside. The sharp citrus scent filled the quiet space immediately. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark windows again. Same uniform, same tired eyes, same woman. And yet something felt different now. For years she had trained herself to shrink inside wealthy spaces. Speak softly, move quickly, never draw attention. Survival depended on invisibility. But tonight she stepped into a room full of people who spent their lives ignoring women like her, and for once they listened. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. Down the hallway, elevator doors opened quietly. Evelyn glanced up instinctively as Harrison stepped out alone. No assistants, no executives, no security trailing behind him. Just the billionaire in a loosened tie carrying a thick leather folder beneath one arm. He looked surprised to see her still working. "It is almost 1 in the morning," he said. Evelyn gave a faint shrug while wiping down the edge of the table. Night shifts do not end early for people in housekeeping. Harrison looked around the nearly empty floor. Neither do crisis investigations, apparently. His voice carried a dryness she had not heard before. Less commanding, more human. He walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city while loosening the top button of his shirt collar. "My legal team finished reviewing the merger documents," he said after a moment. Evelyn paused slightly, but did not interrupt. Harrison opened the folder in his hands. There were 11 hidden liability transfers buried throughout the agreement. He looked down at the papers quietly. "You caught the first one within seconds." Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the cloth in her hand. Sometimes people hiding things become careless when they assume nobody important is listening. Harrison nodded slowly, like the words hit somewhere deeper than he expected. He stepped closer to the conference room table and placed the folder down carefully. "Do you know what I found while reviewing Delacroix Global?" Evelyn shook her head. Harrison's expression darkened faintly. The same law firm responsible for structuring tonight's deal also handled a shipping acquisition in Baltimore 16 years ago. Evelyn froze instantly. Harrison continued softly. "The company your father worked for." The room suddenly felt colder. Evelyn stared at him carefully, unsure whether she wanted to hear more. Harrison opened the folder again and slid one document across the polished table toward her. "Your father was not careless," he said quietly. "He was targeted." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the cleaning cloth. Harrison watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "The debt structure used against him was nearly identical to the one aimed at my company tonight." Evelyn slowly looked down at the document. Her father's name sat near the bottom of the page beneath legal signatures and financial clauses she recognized instantly. For years, she had carried the memory of him sitting silently at their kitchen table, believing he had ruined his family through one terrible mistake. But now, under the soft office lights reflecting across the paper, Evelyn realized something that made her chest ache. Her father had not failed because he was ignorant. He failed because powerful people counted on ordinary workers never understanding the trap until it was too late. Evelyn stared at her father's signature for so long the words around it began to blur. Beneath the office lights, the paper trembled slightly in her hands, though she was not sure whether it came from anger, relief, or exhaustion. Harrison remained silent across from her, giving her space to absorb the truth slowly. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath the fading storm clouds, thousands of tiny lights glowing against wet streets and black rooftops. "He kept every newspaper clipping from that collapse," Evelyn said quietly after a long silence. Her voice sounded distant now, almost lost inside memory. For years he thought if he studied hard enough, maybe he would understand where he went wrong. Harrison lowered his eyes. Evelyn swallowed carefully. "He died believing he failed us." The words settled heavily between them. Harrison rested one hand against the edge of the conference table and looked out toward the city again. He did not fail, he said softly. People with power failed him. Evelyn closed the folder slowly. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixed softly with the distant sound of rainwater dripping somewhere along the tower exterior. Finally, Harrison stepped closer to the table. There is something else, he said carefully. Evelyn looked up. Harrison hesitated briefly before continuing. The law firm responsible for tonight's merger has been targeting struggling companies for years. Hidden transfers, buried liabilities, manufactured bankruptcies. His jaw tightened slightly. Your father was not an isolated case. Evelyn felt a quiet ache spread through her chest. Not shock anymore. Just sadness for all the ordinary people who probably sat at kitchen tables believing their lives collapsed because they were not smart enough to understand the trap. Harrison opened another document from the folder and slid it gently toward her. My legal team is preparing a federal investigation request tonight. Evelyn blinked once in surprise. Harrison met her eyes directly. I want your father's case included. The room went completely still again. Evelyn stared at him carefully, trying to decide whether she trusted what she was hearing. Harrison noticed the hesitation immediately. I know that does not undo what happened, he said quietly. And I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after the way I spoke to you earlier. He paused briefly. But your father deserved the truth. Evelyn looked down at the document again. Her fingers rested against the edge of the page while memories surfaced one after another. Her father falling asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by overdue bills. Marcus trying not to complain about hospital pain because he knew money was disappearing. Her mother pretending everything would somehow be fine while quietly skipping meals to stretch groceries another week. All those years shaped by one carefully hidden signature buried inside legal language nobody explained honestly. Harrison's voice interrupted her thoughts softly. Why did you still help me tonight? Evelyn looked up slowly. Harrison's expression carried genuine confusion now, not arrogance. After everything people with money and power have done to your family, why step into that room at all? Evelyn thought about the question carefully before answering. Because if I stayed silent, another family would eventually sit at another kitchen table believing they failed each other too. Harrison lowered his eyes for several seconds. The answer clearly hit harder than he expected. Evelyn set the folder down gently and picked up her cleaning cloth again. The simple motion seemed to surprise him. You are still going back to work? He asked quietly. Evelyn gave a faint, tired smile. Rent in New York City does not disappear because somebody finally listens to you. For the first time all night, Harrison almost smiled back. Not the polished billionaire smile executives expected from magazine covers and shareholder meetings. Something smaller. Sadder. Human. Then he looked toward the cleaning cart beside the doorway and spoke words nobody inside Vail International would have imagined hearing from him 12 hours earlier. Evelyn, he said softly, you should have never been invisible here. 3 weeks later, the rain was gone from Manhattan, but the city still carried that washed silver glow after sunrise. Vail International Tower stood bright against the morning sky while black cars rolled past the front entrance and employees hurried through revolving glass doors carrying coffee cups and glowing phones. Inside the lobby, polished marble reflected soft golden light from the chandeliers above. Everything looked exactly the same as before, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. Evelyn Brooks stepped through the employee entrance wearing the same gray housekeeping uniform she had worn the night everything changed. The security guard at the front desk straightened immediately when he saw her. Morning, Miss Brooks, he said warmly. Evelyn smiled politely, still not fully used to people saying her name with recognition instead of dismissal. As she crossed the lobby, conversations softened around her. Not out of fear, out of respect. News of the collapsed merger and the federal investigation had spread quietly through financial circles across New York City. Delacroix Global was now under review for corporate fraud tied to multiple bankruptcies over 2 decades, including the collapse that destroyed her father's company in Baltimore. Evelyn never appeared in the newspapers. Harrison made sure of that. He refused every interview asking how Vail International avoided financial disaster at the last second. Someone with integrity spoke when others stayed silent, was the only statement he gave publicly. Nothing more. Evelyn preferred it that way. She did not want attention. She only wanted peace. She walked slowly across the lobby toward the service elevators, her cleaning cart rolling softly behind her over polished stone. Near the center fountain, two young analysts stood discussing overnight market reports. One of them noticed Evelyn and lowered his voice respectfully as she passed. Small moments like that still felt strange to her. For years she moved through buildings unseen, like part of the furniture wealthy people walked around without noticing. Now people looked up when she entered rooms. The elevator chimed softly behind her. Harrison Vale stepped out alone, holding a tablet beneath one arm. His navy suit was crisp as always, but something about him had changed too. The sharp edge in his expression seemed quieter. Now, more aware. He spotted Evelyn instantly. "Good morning," he said. Several nearby employees glanced up in surprise at the sound of the billionaire greeting a housekeeper first. Evelyn stopped beside the elevator doors. "Morning, Mr. Vale." Harrison looked toward the cleaning cart beside her. "Still refusing to quit?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Still refusing to forget where I came from." Harrison nodded slowly, like he respected the answer more than she realized. Then he handed her a thin folder. Evelyn frowned slightly and opened it. Inside was a formal scholarship fund proposal created through Vale International. Her eyes widened as she read the first line. The Brooks Family Financial Ethics Scholarship. Full tuition support for students affected by corporate fraud or financial collapse. Evelyn looked up speechless. Harrison kept his voice calm. "Your father deserved better than silence." The lobby grew strangely quiet around them. Employees pretended not to stare while sunlight poured through the glass entrance behind Harrison, reflecting softly across the marble floor. Evelyn closed the folder carefully, emotion tightening her chest in a way she could not explain. "Thank you," she whispered. Harrison glanced toward the city outside the windows before answering. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for refusing to become invisible." For a moment, neither of them spoke again. The fountain water echoed softly through the lobby while morning light reflected across glass and stone. Then Evelyn noticed one of the older janitors near the front entrance struggling to lift a supply bucket onto his cart. Without hesitation, she walked over and helped him steady it with both hands. The older man smiled gratefully. Harrison watched silently from across the lobby, and standing there beneath the sunlight flooding through the tower windows, he finally understood something wealth had never taught him before. The strongest people in the room are often the ones the world trained itself not to see.